Many leaders struggle to realize that sometimes leadership means the ability to disappoint people at a rate they can absorb. And they want to purchase loyalty, they want to purchase happiness. And so they dole out way too many yeses and dilute the resources of the organization, rather than the hardest word for a leader to learn to say is no. And narrow the focus of the organization. These leaders could construct really hard choices. They knew what data, what voices to include, and what part of their intuition or experience to blend into a great choice. And they could do it consistently and transparently, so people could decode them.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
Your job as a leader is to scale growth. When you think about creating all the strategies, aligning the people, it's all to scale growth, right? Now, growth may not mean financial growth. Most of the time it does. Maybe it means growth inside your market share. Maybe it means penetration inside of certain accounts. When you think about leadership, you've got to scale growth. That's your job. Today, we're going to have a special interview with Ron Carucci. He is with Navalent, and he shares some of the research behind thousands of leaders and what does it take to scale growth. When you think about what types of skills are necessary, we go through the 4 main aspects from his research. We look at them, and the surprising thing is, if you have 3, you're still as likely to fail as if you just had 1. Now, you may not see the correlation there, but inside the interview, we explain exactly what we mean by that. And Ron shares his research specifically and why all 4 are necessary for you to thrive as a leader to scale growth. Now, here's the interview with Ron. Before we dive into the interview, I wanted to remind you that you can actually get a tool that I've been working with clients with for the last couple of years. I've refined this tool that's gone through several iterations. Now we have it completely automated. You can actually go online and fill out the leadership quiz. To get the leadership quiz, just go to theleadershipquiz.com. That's pretty easy, right? Theleadershipquiz.com. What you will get when you do that is you will answer a few questions. You will see where you rate based on the core principles of fast growth companies. If you're ready to grow your company or you want to see where you are, then make sure you go to theleadershipquiz.com. Inside it, you will get insight to where you are, understand where you want to improve, and you will get them mapped into the 10 areas that are most specific to fast growth companies. Again, go to theleadershipquiz.com and you can get that right now. Ron, how are you?
Gene, great. Good to be with you.
Excited to talk to you about leadership from a different perspective today. I know there's some challenges that a lot of people face as leaders when they're trying to scale their companies. But before we jump into that, tell us a little bit about Navalent.
So we're a boutique consulting firm. We've been around for about 15 years. We sort of spend our days roaming the hallways of organizations alongside CEOs or division presidents or people who are founders, and they've gotten their organizations to a certain place and now find themselves at a T intersection or in a ditch, or some opportunity seems out of their reach. And there's something more transformative required than just the normal routine of executing business plans. And our job is to help construct that journey with them, to help them realize the transformational needs of getting from here to there. A lot of times we walk into organizations and it's the classic case of a $100 million company trapped in the body of a $20 million organization. The organization grew, but it didn't scale. And now it's like the teenage boy in his dad's suit. He's just sort of there. The sleeves are too long. The classic, golden retriever puppy hasn't quite grown into his paws yet. And you can hear the seams of the organization ripping. You can hear the place stretched beyond capacity. But for many founders, that looks exciting. It's the energy of a startup. And for many of them, they struggle to realize it's time to do something different.
One of the things we talked about last week was the new models of leadership. And you have done some research on this. You're working with it in the trenches with different companies. What are those new models of leadership that we should be aware of?
Well, so we did a 10-year longitudinal study with more than 2,700 leaders to understand why is it that so many leaders, as they rise up in their careers as they take on broader positions of leadership, as they become CEOs, that more than half of them fail in the first 18 months. And we wanted to understand why that was. So we went back 10 years and looked at 2,700 interviews. We isolated 100 executives in mid-ascent, sort of on their way to the pinnacle roles, to see if we could find out what are the landmines that are getting in their way. And we discovered lots of them. And in our book, Rising to Power, we documented every stone we could unturn to say, here is the treacherous journey of an ascent. And then the great news was that in the research, we were also able to isolate what are the other half doing. If they're sticking the landing and thriving when they get to the top, how are they doing it? And we were able to isolate the patterns of behavior and leadership that those folks are succeeding with.
I would love to go a little bit deeper with that. Like, I've seen some new approaches to leadership, and one of them specifically is kind of a military approach, which is based on authority, and they direct a lot more than I see other types of leaders, and that's more of a style issue. When you think about leaders, like, what are the different models that you're seeing specifically?
So we found, being very declarative, being dictatorial or authoritarian, I think there's a lot of allergy to that kind of leadership. Now, the flip side is, it doesn't mean you don't have to be directive and clear as a leader. Autocratic is a different issue, right? So the four patterns we found in the executives that actually set themselves apart successfully. The first was context. So these leaders could read tea leaves. They were curious. They wanted to understand why things were the way they were. They looked at competitive disruptions coming their way. They looked at cultural things that were odd about the organization, and they recognized that they had to adapt, that they weren't there just to impose an answer or to, affect change, that the context had as much to change in them as they had to change in it. Second was breadth. So when you get to the top of an organization, you see the fragmentation, you see the silos in very different ways. Suddenly they're moats apart. And if you grew up in finance, you no longer have the luxury of seeing the world economically. If you grew up in marketing, you no longer have the luxury of seeing the world through consumers. If you grew up in operations, you no longer have the luxury of seeing the world through process or cost. You now have to see how all the pieces fit together. So breadth, these were the leaders that could stitch the seams, that could make the parts of the whole into the sum of the parts into a whole, and create cohesion out of the fragmentation. The third was choice. So these were the leaders who could make hard choices. Many leaders struggle to realize that sometimes leadership means the ability to disappoint people at a rate they can absorb. And they want to purchase loyalty, they want to purchase happiness. And so they dole out way too many yeses and dilute the resources of the organization, rather than the hardest word for a leader to learn to say is no, and narrow the focus of the organization. These leaders could construct really hard choices. They knew what data, what voices to include, and what part of their intuition or experience to blend into a great choice. And they could do it consistently and transparently so people could decode them. And the last one, not surprisingly, was connection. These leaders had amazing relationships with their boards, their bosses, their peers, their directs. These were the leaders everybody wanted to be around. Every company has them. Everybody wants to work for these people. And the interesting thing about them was the way they prioritized their stakeholders was not based on who they could get something from or who they needed in their network to succeed. Their priority stakeholders were who could they help be successful? Whose agendas could they contribute to? They were on the hunt to make other people more successful, and that's what made them attractive. So breadth, context, choice, connection. The hardest part about the research, Gene, was that it was all four. The success group did all four well. If you did 3 of the 4 well, you were in the failure group. So we did 99 different regression analyses to sort of make sure that if we had to say it was all 4, we could prove it. And so the great news is they're all learnable. You can go acquire those capabilities and learn them across your career. The challenge is, don't wait till your first vice president role. Don't wait till you found your first company to start learning them.
So what I'm hearing behind that is our first-time leaders, because it's a real struggle within this audience. I've heard back from them through my research, is how do we develop the first level of leaders? Like, that frontline leadership is such an important piece to growing. And it is about talent, but it's also about how do you truly lead people? I love these four, and I want to go just a little bit deeper with this. The regression analysis. I took a lot of the statistics and probability inside of my engineering degree 20 years ago, but what does that really tell us? Other than you got to have all four.
So I didn't want to say that. I wanted to be able to say, well, can't we have two of the four and then maybe learn the other two along the way? But we wanted to understand, if half or 60% of these leaders are flailing and flaming out in the first 18 months, why? And each of those dimensions were a cause of failure. And it's right. So you could still have three of them and do them well, but one of them was enough of a significant outage that it would cause you to fail. And each of them has their component of failure. So for example, context and relationship caused you to fail faster, like in the first 6 months, meaning you missed the tea leaves. You didn't read the strategic requirements. You had assumptions you didn't test. And connection means you alienated key people you needed to succeed. And of the stakeholder groups, peers and direct reports were the two that could cause you to fail fastest. Choice and breadth were slower fails because organizations by their nature are fragmented, there are silos. Governance systems and organizations are often clumsy and decision-making is often convoluted. So if you suck at one of those, you might just blend in a little longer before it comes back to bite you. But any one of them they're so critical that any one of them could cause you to derail. For founders and CEOs, context is a major one. Whenever I walk into to founder CEOs and I ask them, tell me your strategy, tell me why you're here, I get so many counterfeits. I get the mission statement, I get the vision statement, I get the purpose statement, I get the annual operating plan, I get the product quotas, I get Costco call, that's the strategy. We have to gear up 4 new lines to meet their demands. And I say to them, that's all very interesting. That does not tell me who you are. Tell me why a customer that you want to serve would pick you over the 5 other people that do what you do within 5 miles of here. What makes you special? What makes you unique? What makes you better than the other options? And until you can answer that question, you can't tell me who you're saying no to. You can't tell me what customers you don't want to serve. And when you can't tell me that, you have no strategy. You may have aspirations, you may have goals, you may have things you want to accomplish, you may have money you want to make, but you have no identity in the marketplace to distinguish yourself. And that is the fundamental of scalability. Doesn't matter how small you are. You could be 10 million, 15 million. Even at that size, strategy work isn't just for big companies. Picking a swim lane where you want to win and sticking to that swim lane, even when other revenue opportunities come your way, is the most fundamental aspect of scaling a company, and most entrepreneurs don't want to say no.
Let's make a real distinction here around what context is. I wanted to jump in and add a little commentary because a lot of people confuse the word content and context. Content is what we're creating. For example, this interview is a piece of content. The context around it is what's most important. It is to be a better leader. It is to see insight, to gain information and wisdom around how you can show up to improve and scale your own growth. Now, that's just an example. How does that relate to your business? Well, your job is to see context across data, across departments, across everything. Ron says it well inside this interview, it's the ability to read the tea leaves. When you have context as a leader, you are able to see future things that the team must do and hopefully align them around that in a very predictable, consistent way. Context is very important. Back to the interview. There's a huge danger if you looked at like a company like Amazon and you saw how big they are now, and you're like, oh, well, they have all these revenue models, right? All these different business units and all of these things. But you got to remember, they started in books.
And it was just textbooks. It wasn't even just all books. And so and they stuck to it. And Jeff has made their culture, every day is day one. That's a big reason why they're so agile, is they got to earn it every day. And you can't emulate Amazon, right? Be who you're meant to be and be the best version of that. But decide, and don't just do it because you have a whim. Many entrepreneurs think, I've got a great idea. I have an answer looking for a question that nobody's asking. And so, you be sure you have something somebody wants to pay for. Be sure don't just fall in love with your idea or your product or your design or your code. Make sure there's somebody else that's going to be as in love with it for the same reasons you want them to be, and that they're willing to pay you for it. Because until then, you're just sort of, it's pie in the sky. You're running a whim. You were the guy that didn't want to work for the man anymore, so I'll go be my own boss, and I'll, start something in my garage, and I'll be the next Jeff Bezos. And if I hear one more entrepreneur say, I'm going to be the Uber of, this is not. Sure, you hear all the grit, passion stories, the curled up on the floor in my bathroom crying for nights, suffering to get my business launched, and then you hear these glory stories. That's not real life, and that's not really how it works. And so if you want to scale a business, if you want to go from being a founder to an executive, to go from being a startup to a grown-up, it's hard, predictable work. It's not magic. There's no pixie dust you sprinkle on it. It really does take work.
Let's go a little bit deeper, because there's something we talked about last week in the pre-interview that I want to highlight here. I'd never heard this before, but I've seen it. So you've put words to it, you put research to it, but it's the difference between scalable structures and bolt-on bodies. I can imagine what the bolt-on bodies would, but let's start there. What is this bolt-on body thing?
Oh, gee, you may think about your clients. How many clients have you heard celebrate the notion of, we went from 20 employees to 100 employees in 6 months? Okay, what are the other 80 doing? You just know they went on a hiring frenzy. They got their Series A money. They got, the angel investor gave them a check, whatever their funding model is, and they just want to bring in bodies. And those bodies are running around. Most of them have no idea what they're doing. They were told, sit in that cubicle, write that code, call those customers, answer those phones. But if you went around and asked any of them, why are you here? What are you contributing to? Most of them, you'd have 100 different answers. And so you just can't bolt on growth. Scaling means you understand that not all of the work in your enterprise is created equally. There are different kinds of work. And if you don't understand who you are strategically, what are the most important differentiators that you're trying to bet the farm on and set yourself apart with, then you're going to see all the work as the same. But you have 3 types of work. You have competitive work. That's the work that if you put $1 into that work, $5 comes in the door. This is the work that makes you special. It's the reason customers are calling you. It's what you're going to become known for. And it's about 15% of the work in your whole portfolio of work. There's competitive enabling work. There's the work that directly supports that critical work. So if you're in analytics as a field, your intelligence gathering mechanisms are your competitive work. Your analysts are your competitive work. Your technology is your competitive enabling work, right? That's another 15% of your work. The rest of the work, about 50 to 60% of it, is necessary. Keeps the lights on, keeps you out of jail, keeps you compliant, but you don't get paid any more money for doing it like anybody else. The problem is when we mix the competitive and the necessary work all together, it all gets diluted. And people are running around with their hair on fire. And when they're making trade-offs every day because somebody's screaming at them, the necessary work always wins because it's always nearer term. It's always shorter priority. It feels like it's productive. You love checking the boxes off. Competitive enabling work is a little bit longer term work. You don't measure it in days and weeks. You measure it in weeks and months and maybe even years. So unless you protect that work and separate it, because you have to do competitive and enabling work better than anybody else. That's where you put your money. That's where you get talent. That's where you hire people. You have to do necessary work as efficiently and cheaply as possible. Maximum efficiency, least cost, automate it, outsource it, whatever you got to do, and keep them apart. But if you don't know which is which, and it all looks the same to you, then you're just going to put a sea of bodies at it, and they're all going to chase whatever activities someone's screaming at them for.
When you talk about the power of executive leadership compared to a hub and spoke leadership, what does that mean in your world?
So many executives, as the organizations grow around them, their identity becomes very linked, right? When you're a founder, if you can't separate out your identity from your idea, from the organization you've built, then you all pathways lead to you. The organization becomes unnecessarily and excessively dependent on you. So you're like a hub and a bunch of spokes. All decision pathways, all resource allocation choices, all strategic decisions, all new product decisions, you're involved way too much. We all have heard the Steve Jobs story. We've all heard all the stories about the leaders who were involved in details and stayed on forever. And some of them would tell you in hindsight they wish they hadn't. So part of building a scalable enterprise, even at from wherever you are, is making sure the organization doesn't rely solely on you. So executive leadership means you're creating cohesion, means you're creating leadership as a capability, meaning other people are leading besides you. Breadth, context, choice, and connection, we talked about it before, are permeating down in the organization. To the question you asked before, Gene, your first line supervisors, as soon as you have new layers of leadership, they're all thinking the same way. They're all aligned. So one of the most painful realities of most startup entrepreneurs is when they grow, they hire their friends grow with them, but their friends aren't getting more talented. And so when it comes time to get money, the VCs are saying, yeah, these yahoos aren't going with you. We're going to layer over them and bring in real professional management. And then you got to fire your friends or demote them because you didn't develop them. You made everything dependent on you. And now your funders are saying you need to install, layer over them, people who can actually grow a business. And you don't like any of them they give you. And then the whole thing falls apart. So you have to separate yourself from being enmeshed with what you created enough to recognize that if you want it to grow bigger, it has to grow way beyond you.
Let's hold on for a second. Ron just said leadership as a capability. When you develop leadership as a capability, it's putting the right training and support to develop your experts, the talented people on your staff, on your team, whatever you call them, and developing that leadership. When you have people that can lead others through uncertain times, when you have people that have a common understanding of how to engage and align people through their words, through vision, through story, all of those things become into a very critical part of the company's success. I really believe this. You don't want to create a bunch of more managers in a time like this. You want to create leaders. Are you doing enough to create leaders? Part of what we do here at Core Elevation, which is a legal name of my company, but what do I do as an executive coach is develop leaders so that they can develop the leaders inside their organizations. If you have any questions about that, make sure you reach out to me, Gene@genehammett.com. Back to the interview. I see that is an issue a lot, especially until they get to the point where they've really built out a highly functioning executive leadership team.
And they have to do that much quicker than most of them think they do. Most of them think that's not time for that yet.
Yeah. I'm really impressed when I see organizations that are, less than 10 people and they're like, we want to put a really high emphasis on people, which is, and I ask the questions like, have you ever been told that that's crazy because of the stage you're in the company? Absolutely. But when they get to a point where they've got 100 employees, that intention around people was so important for their growth and the continued growth of the company.
I hear a lot of startup leaders, even in Silicon Valley, in the tech world, but they all say culture, people is everything. And I think when they say it, they really believe it. And you have lots of VCs now who are putting coaching dollars behind their funders, putting a percent in to help develop talent. But when you actually look at the practices of the organization, when you actually look at hiring, and they all think of like, we give you free lunch, we put a foosball table out there, send you home early, pay for your childcare. That's people oriented. And again, that's not what people really want. I mean, those are great, but if you to be people centric, to be cultural centric, and not be customer centric, right? It's not either or. You can have both. I mean, I think you mentioned last week that sometimes you ask your clients which is more important, people or customers, and it's both are important. And it's not you can't trade them off. But what it means to put people first is a very specific set of how you design your organization, how you design governance, how you design leadership, who gets to allocate resources, who gets to make what say, how you manage conflict, how you deal with making trade-offs of saying we're going to do this, we're not going to do that. And how you navigate those moments, that's what tells me whether or not you really you're buying people free lunch every day.
Well, perfect. Ron, I really appreciate you being here on the podcast, sharing your research and your insights around leadership and what common mistakes keep coming up. I love the fact that it is research-based. Maybe it's because I believe in my own research and how deep I've gone with studying fast growth companies and their leaders and culture. So thanks for being here on the podcast.
Gene, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I love interviewing people who have a deep sense of their own research. They have look at the patterns and can share with us exactly what we need to know so that we can make some decisions for ourselves. If you know you're at a defining moment inside your leadership, you're at an inflection point, you know that you've got to step up to lead in a new way, then I'd love to talk to you about your business and about what's going on right now. If you're looking to scale growth, that's my specialty. And I'd love to talk to you about how you must show up as a leader and some of the things you must let go of in order to develop the leaders that you really need and to become the leader that everyone deserves. Make sure you reach out to me, Gene@genehammett.com. And as always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.